So we actually have a really great segue now to Dr. Jason Mendoza, who's head of neuroimmunology and multiple sclerosis at U.S. Medical at Biogen. And as a scientist and being in industry, certainly we want to hear about how you perceive your role in addressing the community and social context and really CNS health disparities. Please, Dr. Mendoza.
Thank you, Dr. Mesqua. I'm honored to share time with such an accomplished and passionate panel. Thank you for the invite. My disclosure is I work for Biogen. A key part of community engagement is involvement in research and clinical trials, and then later follow-up with quality patient care. Because of regulatory requirements, traditionally, patients with comorbidities were often excluded from phase 3 clinical trials because it's necessary to isolate potential safety concerns with a drug that's under investigation. But we know now that actually may not be adequate for the broad community. So considering social determinants of health and inequities that exist, as discussed by Dr. Williams in the opening, and the sociocultural determinants discussed by Dr. Rivetta Mint, this often leaves underserved populations excluded from clinical trials. So there is an opportunity to reduce health and safety risks from non-treatment and undertreatment due to lack of awareness or lack of data in underserved populations. So how do we solve that as a research community? We now strive to reflect the general population demographics and have more representation in clinical trials, both to be evidence-based, to treat different profiles of patients, and to increase confidence in the scientific data. This will allow patients and their healthcare practitioners to make more informed decisions about treatments. Innovation in science and medicine is really only meaningful if it's accessible to all and applies to all. To do this, the research community needs to run prospective randomized clinical trials, which include underserved populations. African Americans comprise approximately 14% of the US population, but usually have less than 5% representation in clinical trials. For Hispanics, who make up 18% of the US population, clinical trial participation is about 1%. We are all aware of the COVID vaccine studies run by several companies. Those trials had enrollment targets for underrepresented populations, and the companies actually slowed down enrollment to ensure that communities of color were represented and made up about 1/3 of the total enrollment. We're also doing this for our own lupus clinical trial program, setting specific enrollment targets to reflect the prevalence of the disease in underrepresented populations. A different example is in the multiple sclerosis disease state. Most of the phase 3 randomized studies have already happened. We have since conducted large phase 4 studies, which are post-approval clinical studies with broad inclusion criteria, including those that have comorbidities in patients who are older. This is allowed for analysis in underserved populations. That's real-world evidence, or RWE, also known as real-world data. Real-world data, it's important as clinical evidence on the usage and the potential risk benefits of a drug collected outside the scope of randomized clinical studies. Once that data or information is available, we need to ensure patients can clearly understand that scientific information. And that is actually our next speaker's expertise. So with that, I will pass it on to John. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mendoza, for sharing with us some of the perspectives from industry and how we can increase clinical trial or the importance of inclusion actually in future clinical trials. And certainly I want to go back to what Dr. Monica Rivera-Mint mentioned is really important to start from the inception of the study to either involve the community or patient as a stakeholder to all the way to the conduction and post is important for considerations for the future.